Alright, let's do this differently. No shouting hello, just here's me. A new episode, number 8, Men in Space. We're gonna try and build an orbital rocket. We're gonna test it without people on board. Notice the lower left corner, lower right corner of the screen, no portraits. The rocket we've built, we've called it the Thor 7. 7 because it's not the first one, and the design is pretty much based on the R7 from Russia. What that means is that there is a center core that will burn for about 5.5 minutes using an RD-108 engine using kerosene and liquid oxygen, and 4 outer boosters that will burn for about two and a bit minutes. They're using a modified version of the engine, an RD-107. It's rated for slightly shorter burn, but well, they are support engines, so that should be fine. I'm aiming for a polar orbit to well, check out the poles, and well, the booster, based on the calculation, it has the delta V to get this into orbit easily. It's carrying an upper stage with the RD-0105, also Kirillux engine, and this thing should be able to take us into orbit. I've configured abort modes because this is a manned one. Oh snap! It's apparently quite unstable in the early phases of the flight, which we figured out here. Well, good as time as any to test that abort key. Let's hit it. An escape tower taking the capsule out of the fairing, and of course if the rocket's still intact it also shuts down all the engines. That's abort mode 1. Abort mode 2, hidden under the 5 key, shuts down all side boosters, and depending, this is in the case of a booster failure, depending when that happens in the flight may even be recoverable. And then of course we have key number 6, which will jettison the escape tower. Anyway, new rocket, new chances. A bit of a bummer because we had to wait 100 days to build a new one. That's how long it takes. But, you know, this was a clear pilot error, so we're basically going to repeat the last mission exactly. What we're going to try and do is basically do the whole mission except there's no one on board. So if everything burns and dies, it's only hardware that's lost and not another one of our Kerbals. So here we go, lifting off once more, and with this rocket from now on you'll see a slightly steep ascent profile. That's because, as you just saw, in the early phases of the flight, steering is really difficult. And here you can see as these side boosters are close to burning out, their thrust is such that well, it becomes really scary to steer the rocket because it will be accelerating at about 7 to 8 Gs, I think. Look at the meter, it's at 5 now and the fuel is not gone yet. I'm preparing to stage here, and as soon as the boosters burn out I will drop them and the center core will continue on. Whoa! What the hell is that, and how is the rocket even still alive? Let's replay that. That looked spectacular. Alright, so we were coming up on stage separation here, and I'm at the controls. I'm waiting for the sound of the stage burning out. What happens here is one of the boosters fail, and rather than using the appropriate abort command, I stage, thinking they have run out. Well, they hadn't, just the one engine had failed. And, well, I'm gonna say it's by design. It took off the fairing and nothing else. And the rocket jiggles a bit, but it's at 80 kilometers altitude. There's not a lot of air hindering it, and it carves its way through the debris field, and it is otherwise completely fine. These are those moments when you're happy you're recording your gameplay, because that's like a what the hell just happened moment. Then you can rewind and check it out. Alright, so the booster is doing pretty fine. It's got about 3.5 more minutes and 4 and a bit kilometer per second of delta V in the center core. It really is a beast. And it's approaching burn off here. Burn out. It's at 6 kilometers per second, so the upper stage, which is rated for another 3.5, should be able to easily carry this capsule to orbit. There we go. First stage burnout. Now we have to make sure the propellants are nicely settled, and for that, of course, the stage has the booster rockets, settling the propellants and lighting the engine. Everything nominal. Now this thing burns for another 4.5 minutes, so of course we're not going to watch all of that. We're going to switch towards, well, this is like about halfway through the fuel, but if you look at the speed, we're already in orbit. So we're going to take a look at the left side of the screen, the orbit info, and when that is in a acceptable orbit, I'm going to cut the engine as I just did. Looking at the delta V display, we have more than 2 kilometers per second left in the tank. That's promising for any missions we want to do. We now have a booster that can deliver a capsule to orbit with payload or delta V to spare, either one. So now comes possibly the most critical bit of this mission. Now, of course, there's no lives involved. This is just an unmanned test, so no program damnation if it does fail. But what we're going to try is separate the capsule and attempt a retro burn using the RCS thrusters and then a re-entry. Now the thing with re-entries is you want to get the angle just right. And the two things that can happen if you don't get it just right is you can burn up or you can be crushed. And this is, at least for me, a little bit counterintuitive. Because if you go too steep, basically plummeting straight down, you don't burn up. Well, you do encounter a really strong heat flux, but assuming you're carrying a heat shield, that should be fine. But because you're still traveling at orbital velocities and you go down into the atmosphere really, really fast, you are liable to experience extreme G loads, which will not be survivable to your crew or even your vessel. On the other hand, if you take it really, really gently, which is, by the way, what we're doing here, you will spend a long, long time in the upper atmosphere, like 80-90 kilometers, and you will not decelerate so much, but you will slowly roast. Now here, pay attention to the resource tab on the top right of the screen. You can see the ablator and the charred ablator quickly swapping places, while the speed is, well, not really dropping at all. So we're lounging at 90-ish kilometers. We're slowly baking. I mean, sure, the heat flux per second isn't that high, but it's going to go on for minutes and minutes and minutes. And our speed is not slowing down fast enough to put us into any thicker atmosphere anytime soon. So even though we're intuitively taking it easy, we're actually just going to roast the capsule. And as you will see pretty soon, because we're almost out of heat shield, this is not going to end well for the capsule. So what we don't want to do is take it too easy. We rather want to be a little bit more aggressive. We have, however, validated our launcher. Now the capsule will explode shortly. We'll resign to that. It's another piece of hardware dying in flame for the cause. And rather than building a whole new rocket and launching it again to just see what the end stage of the mission should be like, we're going to run a simulation. The build time mod does that. We put a capsule in orbit. Now there's a guy in it, but that's of course a simulated guy, so he's only there to operate the simulated controls. Now what we did here is a 140-kilometer orbit, and we basically put the periapses all the way at ground level. So we're going down a lot faster. We're incurring lots of G loading. Take a look at the nav ball and the G indicator. Simulated Jebediah there is not having a great time. He's experiencing 3 to 4 Gs. But the heat shield, even though it took a beating, I mean it took a beating a lot faster than it did in the other one, in the real run. But we are now slowed down enough and everyone lived. With that information, we feel confident to now put real Jebediah on this Thor 7M rocket. It's the same rocket, it just carries an M because it carries a Jebediah. So we're going to do the same mission we watched before, hopefully without any explosions, without any failures, without any abort modes required, and of course without capsule incineration. Let's go. Guys, everyone is crossing their fingers, throttle up, pumps are on, lighting the engines, thrust is nominal, let's release the clamps and ascend. Jebediah is looking skyward in his little portrait, and now, as long as nothing is gonna go wrong, we'll make history in the next hour. Let's see, the booster phase, we're going straight up, no risk of any aerodynamic shenanigans, only pitching over once we're nearing booster separation. Now, of course, this is not so efficient, but we saw we had 2 kilometers per second of delta V to spare, so we don't need maximum efficiency. Here we are, clean separation, none of those side boosters failing or exploding. Completing the pitch over on the first stage. Of course, we now need to ditch the escape tower. Let's do that. We'll deflect our course a little bit just to make sure that we don't hit the escape tower a few seconds later, or a few minutes later. First stage burnout. Now one more tense moment. I mean, we only have one ignition on this engine, so we don't need to. We shouldn't mess up the start. Although with these rockets, maybe 4 of them is a little bit redundant. It's never gone wrong, but that's a good thing, right? So now we have a lengthy last stage burn. Always a little bit tense because we only have the one engine, and if it fails, we can't really go anywhere. We'll be doomed to the trajectory that we are on then, barring like 100 meters per second from the onboard RCS. No surprises here, the tests apparently have paid off. The engine failures have improved reliability to the point that the really important mission, being this one, hasn't incurred any engine failures at all. We're in orbit, Jebediah is floating, he's staring at the Earth, transmitting some science back, and he's being a happy little Kerbal. And I'm happy with him. But now we know, of course, here comes the most dangerous part. Time to separate from the rocket, turn around, burn retro, and if at all possible, pick a spot so that you land in the daylight, otherwise it's going to be real boring, because we're just going to be watching a black screen. But most importantly, don't die. Now the question is, where are we going to put our periapsis? Our apoapsis is at 400 kilometers, and we know from the simulation that an apoapsis of a 140 going like straight into the ground on deceleration, like with the periapsis at like ground level, that's fine. Now I reason 140, 380, same difference. Let's just do the same thing again. We'll put the periapsis at ground level. That'll be a steep, aggressive descent, and we know the heat shield can take it. So here we go, throwing the capsule into the fire. A little bit of time acceleration on there because these re-entries and launches with real solar system, man, they do take a long time. But there we go, we can see the capsule starting to glow. The shock heating is starting. Basically the fireball phase is commencing. Jebediah, of course, he likes it. We're at 70 kilometers, 7 kilometers per second. And once again, pay attention to the top right of the screen where we can see the ablator ablating. And once that's gone, the capsule will burn up in short order. So it's imperative that we slow down enough so that the heating stops before the shield gives out. That's what we're trying to do here. Gs are slowly mounting. We're up to 3 Gs. Jebediah's had worse during launch, so that should still be fine. Let's turn on the descent mode actually. That shifts the center of gravity of the command module slightly so it generates some lift. It's actually basically a bit of a wing, and that will slow our descent. Not necessarily our forward velocity, but makes us spend a little bit more time in the higher up atmosphere. I know I just talked a long time about how that's a bad thing, but you really want to find the midway point. Neither extreme is good. So here we are, we're still at 4-ish Gs, we're still at 6.3 kilometers per second. We're more than halfway through our heat shield, so we better start decelerating soon. We're just about to reach 5 Gs. Now that means the deceleration is really picking up. The ablation of the shield is slowing down. Maybe that's because we're in the thicker atmosphere that's actually carrying more heat away. I don't know exactly how this works. In fact, I'm not an aerodynamics engineer. Gs are really piling on now. We're passing 10. Fortunately, Jebediah has made of real stern stuff. I hear it's green. We're at only 40 kilometers of altitude. G readings are now off the scale. I'm getting worried, but we're at 3.5 kilometers per second. That's more than half the way there. The ablator is going. There's a little bit left in it. Jebediah can probably start to get warm feet through that. Less than 2 kilometers per second. G's still off the charts. I'm really worried for his health and safety, and he might pass out and die, which would be very unceremonious. But there we go. The fire disappears. We're at 700 meters per second. About to go subsonic, and then we can start to think about deploying parachutes. And ladies and gentlemen, or going by the YouTube stats, guys, we almost did it. Let's deploy the parachutes, and we'll be the first. We'll have returned the first orbiting Kerbal, actually the first spacebound Kerbal. No, wait, we had a suborbital flight. All right, we have returned the first orbital vessel with a guy in it, both of them at once. Safe splashdown in 3, 2, 1. That's a great ending for the episode. See you next time. Thanks for watching.